So we get to know about the parents too, obviously throughout the book, but especially just about before she leaves, and they just like you talk about. I mean, do you see them as like middle class, upper middle class? They talk about the father who and the mother. They use terms like burger. Is that a real term? It kind of referred to
Yeah, 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 yeah.
like foreigners, right?
Well, it's no, it's not exactly foreigners. It's someone who is um there's a lot of anxiety in Pakistan about westernization, as I think there is in a lot of as anywhere
Sure.
that is not the West. And so anyone, burger is a term that sort of means someone who's westernized,
Okay.
who is does not like, for instance, like speaking Urdu too much, prefers English. And it's
Mm.
obviously a lot of it is like tied to class and language and where you live. And so, but
Okay.
generally the elite. Yeah.
So foreign influence more than foreigners.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. So her mother is Hira's mother is definitely somebody who is she does not believe necessarily in the old school traditional role of a woman. She definitely is, but she's not somebody who's, as loud and outspoken about it as Hira doesn't
Hmm.
seem,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? There,
Yeah.
the times where, I mean, she seems like she very much controls it. There's something where it's like there's some really great descriptions of her like wanting to or not but not being able to like get mad or get angry or get ticked off. And the father is definitely very educated. How would you describe the way that they look upon or look down upon kind of, I don't know, regular folk?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great question, I think, because I think I I'm obsessed with how class works.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me growing up, because obviously every country has its own set of like identity politics, and obviously in
Mm.
the US, like a lot of the conversation is about race, which makes a lot of sense. But in Pakistan, a lot of the questions that I thought of, or a lot of the ways in which people are demarcated against one another, is
Mm-hmm.
through class. And so I grew up thinking about that a lot, and I think that um, that's one of the things that it's so funny because I've a lot of the times when I have friends visit, that's one of the first things that they notice as well, just how rigid
Mm.
the class delineations are, like
Right.
where people eat and where people sit, and
Mm.
how like the house help, like they never eat with the family and they
Yeah.
always eat in the kitchen. And there's all these like very, very small things that are very noticeable to anyone who's not from there, but even to people who do live there.
Right.
So I think that that's what is the case with Hera's family as well. And it's tricky because it's again, it's something that it's something that's so prevalent that in a lot of ways they're not the ones who are being strange by doing it.
Mm.
It's Hera who's noticing it because like she's a younger generation, and she like also
Mm.
is like a more, she's the kind of person who notices these things and who brings these up. But um she is also doing this without having sort of like the wisdom to understand that, okay, like there's a certain, like her parents, they were like socialized into these things as well. So it's that teenage voice that obviously has a lot of smart things to say, but frequently doesn't give people enough
Mm.
grace, if
Right.
you will.
Right. Yeah, those are some of the subtleties that were just so well done. I mean, the way that you write about class in this book is one of the best I've ever seen. It's just like, again, the subtleties, the skipping the line at the airport, kind of looking behind you. Like, when she comes back to Pakistan,
Mhm.
she sees the same lady she, talked to in line for the bathroom or something like that. And it's kind of like, awkward, no eye contact,
Yeah.
and just like the fact that one of the maid or the cook, I don't, like her daughter sometimes cooks and she's like Hira's age,
Hmm. Hmm.
and just like how could you not be kind of like uneasy with that a little bit
Right.
if you're Hira in that particular case, right? And they use terms, the parents use terms like people of all kinds, kind of like a negative, could be a positive,
Right.
kind of a negative. And then what was
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember exactly what part of the book, but it was a term in Urdu that also they kind of describe like regular people. I'm not explaining that
Yeah.
very well.
Yeah. 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 No.
It was translated in English as like, dang it. Maybe I'll remember in a minute, but
Yeah, no, I'm blanking on it as well.
yeah.
I yeah.
Wait, you mean you don't remember every single word of your book? Come on.
I know. I need
Page
to reread
174,
it.
third column. Yeah. So, the idea of the mother saying in those early chapters, which is that flashback or flash forward where she has tuberculosis, kind of, what has America done to my child? This was America. America as a, what's the term? The synecdoche kind of thing, right? Like America is representative, this big metaphor, this big entity. Even though she was testing positive for tuberculosis before she left, that was obviously one reason to maybe be a little hesitant.
Yeah.
Her parents were very hesitant just overall. They didn't want the burger complex, etc. Why do you
Yeah.
think that they let her go?
Yeah. So I think that um there's there's this idea that going westward, specifically to like the few countries that are like very um like sort of like alive
Mm-hmm.
in the imagination. So which by which I mean places where there already are a lot of people who've gone. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of Pakistanis have obviously moved to the US, to the UK, Australia, obviously, the classics, and then the Gulf as well. So
Mm-hmm.
given that America is one of them, that place already exists in the parents' mind as like, oh, a Bible place to go to. And then it's there's always also this idea that moving there can only be good for you. Moving there can only be sort of like positive in terms of like educational and career perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is always sort of like for this specific professional class that Hera's family belongs to, there's always this tussle because on the one hand, they definitely want to reap or they want to reap those benefits, the like the sort of practical benefits that can come from that migration. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, they do not want any of like the cultural influence that is
Okay, right,
inevitably going to be part of that,
right.
right?
They would have been so happy, right, if Hera would have ended up in New Jersey like her friend, right, with the
Yeah,
Desi family,
yeah, exactly.
Indian
Yeah,
Muslim
yeah,
family, right?
yeah,
And when
yeah,
Hera goes to visit, it's kind of like this could be anywhere. It definitely felt
yeah,
different in many ways.
yeah,
Some of the commercialism and all that, but yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you for the explanation. And as far as her, her grandfather, well, he is somebody saying like, hey, while the elders in your family are still sitting, I love that term. While the elders are still sitting, and she doesn't need to go, and he's not being a jerk about it. There's definitely a beautiful relationship between granddaughter and grandfather, but he's basically saying, nah, she shouldn't be going, right?
Hmm.
In the end, she does. We talked a little bit about Kelly, first connection with Amy, who is Kelly's daughter. She's, kind of a typical teenager. She's not extremely warm, but she's not cold.
Hmm.
Um, and they're both around the same age. There are a lot of connections, but there are also some differences, in culture for obvious reasons, coming from different countries, different languages, histories. But I guess we can find this out more as the book goes on. But Amy seems to be really into this small town and the machinations of what happens there. But she definitely, towards the end, we get the impression she definitely wants to spread her wings. New York is the dream, right? How
Hmm.
about Hira's purported dream of driving with a cigarette?
Hmm.
That was a cool
Yeah.
image. Where did that come from? That image?
Um, it's so funny because I think I remember when I was writing, most of this book is written in Pakistan
Hmm.
because I was there on like I took a month off at one point and then I took a longer period of time. And I was just at home because at this point a lot of my friends don't live in the same city anymore. So in
Hmm.
some ways going back home is actually
I know,
great for
right?
my writing
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
I don't know anyone there. I just like sit
It's
and
a weird
write.
phenomenon, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's fantastic. I don't know if for you sound like you're relating. Is that the
Well,
case for
just
you as well?
not necessarily about the writing part of it, but just like the idea of it's just a weird phenomenon in that going back to your hometown, and it's not. I mean, what I'm saying is nothing new, but just like it's not the same
Yeah,
because yeah,
yeah,
so many people. It's not the people who you grew up with. They're not. They
used to, yeah,
moved, or they got their family, or they're 20 minutes away, or they're 2 hours away, or 5 hours away.
yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I wrote this, and my brothers were also actually there. And I remember when I wrote the scene, I like told them later on, and I was like, you know what? I would love to do that too. Um, and they were like, it's not hard at all. Like we can just get in a car right now,
Right.
and just you can smoke a cigarette out the window. It's not a big deal. And I was like, no, but it's not. It's not going to be the same if like
Mm,
no, like it's never going to be the way I think it will be,
yeah.
which is what happens with Hera. And
Mm.
I sort of like love that scene, the
Uh-huh.
final scene. And
Yeah.
it's funny because it wasn't in one of like the initial drafts, and then my agent said
Um,
that I should put something in to sort of like wrap up the relationship between Hera and Amy.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's when that scene was came into being, and I really like that.
Yeah. So I mean, like that could be like the maybe when it goes to a different printing, that could be like the cover with like
Yeah. Oh, hey. Yeah.
like that looks a lot like the
Good
author.
idea.
That looks like a lot like
Yeah.
the author smoking a cigarette. I think it is her. It is her.
Yeah. Hey
Oh
man,
man.
maybe it can just be maybe it can be a photo of me. Now there's sometimes you see like even for like fiction, there's like covers that are like real people.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. That's funny. Again, I'm sorry to harp on it, but it's in a positive thing. Just the subtleties of the book. There's like, I don't know, a paragraph and a half or two big paragraphs just about this push and pull between like Hira, and I assume you're kind of speaking for maybe yourself and many others, but just like this weird, like, oh, thanks for the compliment, but also like, why would you compliment me? Like being complimented for your English as a foreigner,
Right.
right? And just the way that you describe it in the book is just such a cool window for the reader. Like, okay, I get it. Yeah, so and so's from whatever country. Like, I could see why someone would compliment them. English maybe wasn't the official language of that country, but
Right.
also, and there's Hira
Yeah.
who's studied in it, who's gone to school with English, who speaks it in many ways better than the Americans. That part was just so the subtleties that came with it that really make this book so great.
Thank you.
The the town, it's a very, like you said extremely conservative earlier. They're church people. You got the positive connotations of a small town. They're, for the most part, they're friendly, they're
Hmm.
generous. It's also, fairly poor. There's
Hmm.
ignorance. There's definitely ignorance in the denotative sense where they literally don't know things. There are also
Hmm.
some definitely like, with a negative connotation where they choose to be ignorant. I wonder about her place in this small town and kind of like her feeling that she didn't fit in, but also how much of it is like, oh, cool, I'm an outsider, I can be a chronicler of this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great um differentiation that you're making. I think that so the town that I went to for my exchange program was a lot like the name is fictional, but or I'm sure maybe there is a Lakeview in Oregon, but that's not the one that this book is set in. And I'm just it's been 10 years, as I said, or it was 10 years since I moved that I
Yeah.
wrote about that. Yeah, and I was just so entranced by how different that place was from anywhere else that I'd been in the US.
Hmm.
Because obviously, like most people who come here from abroad, I later on found myself in like the classic places, the places with opportunities, the
Mm-hmm.
cities, mostly the eastern seaboard. And
Right.
I was just like, it kept striking me over and over again how different that place was, and how even as you said, like it's so different for Hera that she doesn't even she's such an oddity there that it like a lot of the like classic, instances of racism or whatever you want to call it, or instances of being other don't even apply because
Hmm.
no one has ever met someone like her before. And she knows very much that this is not a space where she could like this is not a place where she could move.
Mhm.
And so in some ways that like puts her very firmly in this position of the outsider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that really nuanced again scene with where they're out kind of sightseeing or something like nature wise, and she goes up to this little kid and it's like, oh, it's so cute, and kind of like caresses his cheek or something like that, right? And everyone's just like, what are you doing? And he's like, stranger, and like you talk about that
Yeah.
that could have gone wrong, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
could have gone way worse. But just
Yeah,
that
for
was something
sure.
she was used to in Pakistan.
Mhm.
No one would have batted an eyelash kind of thing, right? She's there for a while, but part of that is Ramadan. And she also gets into onto the volleyball team. She's not the greatest player.
Nope. Nope, she is not.
Doesn't necessarily love it either. But it's something she does, keeps her busy. And I mean, obviously that makes it even harder when she's going through. I've heard about, a lot of times about athletes going through Ramadan, and it's like, hey, this helped me. Like, I'm more focused, et cetera, et cetera. Not
Mhm.
her, not her. She's like, I hate this sport. I don't want to be running. I don't.
Yeah.
So she's very weak. She loses weight. There are times where she's proud of it. But the people she sees on Facebook, other people in the program, they're all gaining weight and she's
Mhm.
not. And this little cough and little symptoms like that start, kind of as we go through, which like we talked about ends up with tuberculosis. How much blame is to be had for Kelly? She doesn't really cook at all.
Mhm.
It's a lot of frozen food. And hey, I'm sorry. She's upfront about it. She's like, I'm just really not going to cook. How much maybe blame, if that's even the word, goes to Kelly,
Yeah.
the weakening of Hira?
Yeah. So I think, I don't know. I think like that obviously is one of the sort of like central questions of the book, which more than just like the blame of the feeding, it's the question of like at what point do you become responsible for your own life?
Hmm.
Because Hera very much exists in that liminal space of okay, there still has to be an adult who takes care of her, but also she is not like 12. If she wanted to, she could, fend for herself, if she needed to. Um, and then again, there's the question of like, okay, should she need to? Like, isn't the whole point of an exchange program that she should be in the hands of people who
Right.
should take care of her, right? And I don't know. I think I wanted to leave that sort of intentionally, like as you said a little while back, the like she did test positive before she came to the US. So in some ways, like the harm had already been done. But
Hmm.
she would not have gotten sick if there had been. So I wanted to leave like that question of blame
Yeah.
intentionally murky.
Hmm.
And I think that um, because again, like with me as well, like I had a very different experience, but even looking back, I sometimes I think, oh, my, you know, um, like why did I not, was I not eating properly? Like, were
Mm.
people not feeding me properly? Was my idea of like being like, so there's all these, but I think that was intentionally left murky.
Hmm. So I mean, before she gets full blown sick with tuberculosis, she's um, again, the book could easily fall into tropes like you even writing almost like meta, right? Where we hit her saying basically like there could be the foreigner thing, like, oh, everything is so interesting to her and she's so fascinated. There could be the foreigner who's like, waiting for other people to slip up and be ignorant and be racist, be biased. And hers is just like, quote, I was bloody bored. Right. And some of the best writing is just like in those days where she's just bored. There's just not a lot going on. She's not in New York City. She's not in LA. She's not in Chicago. She's in, Lakeside, Lakeview, um,
Lakeview, yeah.
Oregon, right?
Hmm.
And she, part of that boredom, she starts to talk to Ali, who's kind of like, I guess, a friend of a friend. Is that a safe way to put it?
Yeah, like a family friend, yeah.
Yeah, family friend, right? And he's a little bit older. He's in school in New York. And she just love's not the word, but is she in love with him? No. Yes, partly, maybe.
Yeah,
She
I
could
mean,
be in love with
the
him.
way people at that age fall in love with someone that they haven't met.
Enamored for sure, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And he's I was waiting for him to slip up, but he's a good dude, right? He's a really good dude, but
Dang it.
but yeah, just I know. But just shows like, that he just ideas again of like of home, and he's in many ways made himself at home.
Hmm.
He's not skewing. I don't know if I said the word skewing home in Pakistan, but in the moment at the time, that's his home, and that could change, right?
Hmm.
And so they do end up having a time together where she comes to New York and New Jersey to see her friend. Um, and just in talking about ideas of home, and she's really she says at one time or writes at one time that she's just baffled by people who haven't wanted to flee, right? To her, that just seems to be a natural thing. And then, back to school, there's Hamid. Am I saying the name correctly?
Yeah.
Hamid is from Oman, and he's also an exchange student, and he's a good friend to her, but they're different. They definitely have different philosophies, right? How would you describe the way that they kind of navigate the world of small town Oregon as exchange students?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that before before I even answer this question, I think one of the sort of most frustrating things to me about Hira is that she focuses a lot more on like differences and like the ways that in which she is fragmented from other people than the similarities that she might have with them, and she
Mm,
uses that as a way of defining herself. So like
mm.
she is constantly defining herself as like this person is this thing, I'm not that thing, therefore I am not that thing,
Right, right,
like
right.
so, and that's, I think maybe that's a teenager thing to do, or maybe that's just a hit thing to do. But it that was definitely like one of the more frustrating things about her to me. But you, so sorry, going back to Hamid, where did we land with the
Well,
question?
just like it's just as far as like the different philosophies. I mean, towards the end, they really kind of break off like, hey,
Right.
we're just not, we got to agree to disagree. Sorry, man. We're
Yeah.
just, kind of
Yeah.
like diametrically opposed. But just kind of
Yeah.
like the way that he navigates through high school life specifically, really.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I think I saw a lot of that in like the different ways in which different exchange students were here as well. When during the program,
Mm,
obviously everyone is capable of assimilating in different ways. And so there were some students who were very much like, okay, this is my one American year. I'm
mhm,
going to be, more American than apple pie. Like I'm gonna
mhm,
do everything. And then there were some students who were like much more timid, and like who for some reason or the other did not want to do certain things, had much
mhm,
clear boundaries of, okay, these are the things that I'm not going to do. Um, and I think that Hira and Hamid just like land very differently on those things.
mhm,
And again, I think it's a factor of their still, their youth and in some ways immaturity that they like. Because I think maybe to an older person that would be very natural, right? Like obviously different people have different landing places.
mhm.
But for them that becomes a way of, okay, this is the way in which we're different, and maybe that's, tomato tomato, like let's call the
Right,
whole thing off.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I appreciate that. So, with the um with her sickness, I mean, she's forced to quarantine for a while. I mean, I was definitely thinking a lot of COVID, right?
Right. Yes. Yes.
Should I wear a mask and all these things like, oh
Yeah.
man, you were like not a prophet, like you saw the future or something. I don't know.
No, no, it's crazy because I remember the final edits that I did were in March 2020, like before
Mhm.
I sent the book out on submissions,
Mhm.
and it was wild to be writing those final scenes.
I
As
bet.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I'm really doing my best here to, because people need to read this book. I'm really doing my best not to, spoil, doing any spoilers. So I mean, with that quarantine, we'll just kind of end it there as far as plot. Like with the quarantine, a lot of, she has a lot of time to think, a lot of time to read. Faiz, is that how you pronounce the poet?
Fez.
Fez, excuse me. Fez, she really just really takes to the writing. She's kind of like, this totally sums up my life and sums me up, and I'm learning so much. And there's also, the awkwardness, like she was at the wedding and it's like, oh hey everybody, I have it now, and you gotta take this disease that makes your pee turn orange, and
Yeah, yeah,
and sorry about that. And well, did you know? Did I?
yeah,
It wasn't your fault. And
yeah.
she had a really nice relationship with Hannah. Hannah was the
Right.
mother,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Kelly's
Kelly's
mother. Yeah.
mom. But you could tell
Mhm.
she was kind of like, why didn't you do anything? And why didn't you tell
Yeah,
us? And
yeah,
you knew, and just the
yeah.
blame game and all that, and the city. And she's in her bed thinking like, do people in this town hate me? They don't necessarily seem to when she comes back for a reunion at the church,
Yeah.
but I mean, I'm sure there were people kind of like looking at her weird, right? But just ideas of that quarantine and how that in some ways was like a rite of passage for her, right? She almost like grew up in those times.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. And then the big question is, do I go home? And her
Right.
mother and father, for the most part, definitely her father more like, yes, come home. Like, and
Hmm.
she's like, do I steal out of here in the night? Even, I gotta wait till I'm not contagious
Right.
anymore. And just those questions, which of course I'll come back to the ideas of home. I mean, home is such a huge theme in the book. You know, where is my home? No one ever. There's a great quote that's so simple, but here kind of like a monologue of sorts. She writes, "No one ever leaves. No one has ever left," and that's inclusive of like human history, right? It's not just saying this town. You know, just ideas of like the grass is greener on the other side.
Mhm.
Um, Independence for sure is a theme. I mean, she's
Mhm.
what, 17, 17, maybe turns 18,
17, yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
16 going on 17, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those where she's, 16 going on 40, right? I mean, she's
Yeah.
an old soul for sure, right? We talked about, I mean, gender roles for sure are is a theme. She sorry, remind me of her friend, the one who remind me of her name, the one who lives in Jersey as part of the exchange program.
Zara.
Right. And Zara, is wearing the scarf, which she had never worn in Pakistan. And she's kind of like, oh, well, it's kind of like a fashion thing. How did Hira look at her there? Did she look at her as kind of like, hey, I thought we were in this together? Was it kind of like, I get it? Like how did she kind of look at that maybe as performative? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So again, like going back to this idea of like Hira constantly using other people as, this benchmark of what she's not.
Uh-huh.
Because she very much could have looked at that and thought, oh, this is something that, because we know from Hira saying this that she has also worn the scarf in the past. So she
Right.
could have used that as like, oh, this is something that I did. This is an exploration that I embarked on, and now my
Hmm.
friend is doing it. Um, but like more frustratingly, both to I think the reader and also to Sada herself,
Hmm.
Hira uses that as a, oh, this is weird. Why are you doing this? And is America making you more religious? And which I mean, it frequently does. A lot
Hmm.
of times, obviously, because it's a the action versus reaction thing where when people move
Hmm.
here, they're a lot. Sometimes they hold on even more strongly to parts of their identity that didn't mean as much
Hmm.
to them back home. And the
Hmm.
scarf becomes something like that for Zara, maybe. Um, and so Hira very much thinks it's that and like judges her for that because she's also bringing some of her baggage of like, what does the scarf mean? And
Hmm.
do people sometimes wear it performatively from back home?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that, again, the biggest thing is that she sort of refuses to give Zara the grace that that I think Zara is owed. And then they have that argument in New Jersey about that.
That makes sense. I had the pleasure to speak with Saima Sitwat. She's Pakistani American. She wrote American Muslim.
Oh,
And
very cool.
what you were saying about like the idea of maybe being even more religious in the States was something that she really talked about, like things that were taken for granted in Pakistan.
Right.
And it was kind of like because like you said, action and reaction, I guess is the way you described it, which was really interesting. But she was talking about those were some of her first impressions in the States with the Muslim Americans was like, okay, wow. Um, Things that we taken for granted, aren't taken for granted here, therefore, right? Yeah. Very interesting. Thank you for that. Thank you for this book. Like I said, the fact that you've written this as your debut novel, I mean, wow. You
Thank you so much.
just retire while you're on top, you know what I mean? Just like shoot. People talk about singers being one-hit wonders. I'd love to be a one-hit wonder, and this is a big time hit. But I know that you got the writing bug. I'd love to know what other great work you're working on. Maybe you're at a break now, or what do you have coming in the future?
Yeah, I'm very much at work on a second novel.
Nice.
I'm not going to say too much about it, just following the vein of writers being superstitious
Okay.
about
Does it have
current
words in
projects.
it? It has
Correct.
word.
Yes.
It does. Oh,
Yes.
nice. Okay,
Yes.
that's good
Yes.
to know.
There you
Okay.
go.
Is it
I give it
a
away.
is it a complete departure from your first, or there's some?
Yeah.
It is.
Yes. Yes.
Cool. Cool. Well, yeah. Last thing I'll ask you about the book is the cover. Is that Hira on the cover? Is that Kelly?
I think it's meant to be Hida. It's funny because I love the American cover. I just like absolutely adored the cover. But what's
Hmm.
funny is that I did not um when I you know how so a lot of sometimes writers send in like the little I don't know, the briefs that
Okay.
like the art director or whoever, the person who's designing the cover
Yeah.
sort of takes and runs with.
Yeah.
This is nothing like what I had asked for.
Hmm.
And but I just like I saw it and I like completely fell in love with it. And then the editor was also kind enough to let me put in lines of Urdu poetry into.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see, there's like lines in there that I wrote myself.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Which and so I really really loved that as well. But yeah, I think it's meant to be hit with a fever, which explains the cheeks.
Right, 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 right. I was wondering if there's maybe a little bit of that eyeshadow. I remember one time she'd worn a little bit of makeup and got rid of most
Oh,
of it
that's
except for the
true. That
eyeshadow.
is true. Yeah, that's
Well,
true.
you referenced the great Peter Ho Davies, author of The Welsh Girl, on the front cover. Quote,
Hmm.
"This is a fearless, exacting, essential work and marks the debut of a thrilling new global voice." Agreed, 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 agreed. Tell us about the publisher, good places to buy the book, maybe some places local in New Jersey, maybe some of the smaller bookstores, but just all that good stuff, social media info, contact, where to buy the book.
Yeah. So the book is published in the US by Skyhorse and distributed through Simon Schuster, but you can find it wherever you buy your books in New Jersey. I love Word bookstores. They have their I think they started out of Brooklyn, but now have a store in Jersey City.
Okay.
There's Watchung Booksellers in Montclair. And obviously New York is just like you can't walk a block without bumping into like a fantastic bookstore. So
Hmm.
yeah, it should be available most places that sell books.
Cool. Are you extremely online? Are you Instagram and Twitter? Maybe just one or the other?
I went off of Twitter
Good for you.
before it became cool to do so.
Uh, You're a
Yeah.
Twitter hipster or an anti-hipster or something.
Exactly. I am still on Instagram. You can find me under my name. I have a website that has all my works, all my essays, and a lot of the nonfiction that I wrote before the book. Because before I wrote this novel, I mostly wrote nonfiction. So
Hmm. Excellent. Well, people listening, you need to buy this book. It's, exciting new global voice is the word. Definitely exciting new voice. And thanks so much for your time. And I'm looking forward to your next work and your third and your fourth and your fifth and all that good stuff. Thanks again so much.
thank you so much, Peter. Thank you for having me. It was
Pleasure
a
talking to
pleasure.
you.
All right.